Well, hello everybody and welcome to Communication Strategies for Introverted Leaders. I'm so excited to have you today. And let me see if I can move this forward. So today we're going to talk about some of the unique challenges that leaders have when they're naturally introverted, but they're trying in a leadership position to do what they think they should do, which often involves acting more extroverted, and often that backfires. So what I want to do today is talk about how introverts can be very effective as leaders, but also meet their team's needs. Because if you manage a team, your team needs to be communicated to, and your team needs to be supported. And sometimes when an introvert is overly stressed, their tendency is to withdraw, and then the team doesn't feel supported and doesn't feel communicated to. So then the introvert begins to try acting more like an extrovert, maybe because they've gotten some feedback, and then they get even more drained and even more stressed, and it becomes kind of a vicious cycle. So extroverted leaders and introverted leaders can both be very effective. So when I talk about how introverted leaders can communicate, I am not saying anything negative about extroverted leaders. I think extroverted leaders can communicate and introverted leaders can communicate, but often the way an extrovert communicates and the way an introvert communicates is different, and also the way an extrovert is energized and the way an introvert is energized is different. And it really helps when you honor your own style, because you can always be at your best and your most effective if you're honoring your own style and your own needs. So today we're going to focus on what do introverts need and how can introverts meet the needs of their team while also honoring their own style. So on the slide that you see in front of you right now, we have a picture of a conversation. And let's think about, as an introverted leader, what is it that you need? And those of you who have access to a chat box, feel free to think about what you need, in your work environment as an introvert, and feel free to chat that in. And when I'm done reading the bullets, I'll take a look to see if anyone's chatted anything in that's different from what we have. But what I've noticed from the people that I have coached is that introverted leaders tend to need more quiet time to be alone and think, extra time to process things in their head before making decisions, opportunities to share their thinking with others without being rushed, and more thoughtful one-on-one interactions. So in general, the difference between introverts and extroverts is extroverts, when they talk, they're hearing themselves talk, and that's part of their thinking process. So they can respond to questions immediately without having to think about them in their head beforehand, whereas an introvert actually has a brain that's wired differently, and the brain neural pathways from receiving information to saying something, they're longer, so it takes longer. An introvert actually wants to think before saying anything. And there are pros and cons to being an extrovert and an introvert. So if you are an extrovert, usually you can respond to things more quickly. You can have a really flippant response or a comeback when someone says something to you in a meeting, and it can just happen, in a nanosecond. And so that's kind of a strength of being an extrovert. But on the flip side of that, as an extrovert, sometimes the things that come out of your mouth you regret later because you didn't really think them through beforehand. With an introvert, you have kind of the flip side of that, which is often it takes longer. So someone can say something to you in a meeting and you sort of freeze like deer in a headlight. You can't respond right away. But then if you're given the time you need to think through something, usually your response is much more thought out, and people actually value what you say. You tend to regret what you say less often. So, it's neither here nor there, but knowing whether you're an introvert or an extrovert and honoring that really helps you be more effective. So I'm just going to take a look at my box to see if anyone's chatted anything in. Let's see if I can see the chat box. Doesn't look like it, so I'm going to move on. So Now, as a leader, you have to respond to your needs. So let's think about some things that people need from their bosses. All right. So if I'm on a team, I need my boss to communicate my goals to me. So I need a clear understanding of my goals, right? I need regular feedback on my performance. I need support and encouragement. I need to feel like I have a positive relationship with my boss. And I need career development guidance. I need to understand how I can develop, improve myself, grow within the organization. And there are probably other things too. These are just the first things that I thought of off the top of my head. Now, either an extrovert or an introvert can provide these things to their employees. It doesn't matter how you provide them, but what matters is that you do provide them. And here is what I've noticed. Now, I happen to coach a lot of introverts. And what I find happens is that an introvert gets very drained by interruptions. So when employees come and knock on their door, you know, it's kind of a cool thing to say, hey, I have an open door policy. But what happens is when an introvert tries to have an open door policy and people actually take advantage of that and come in, an introvert often, and I'm stereotyping here, saying in general from a lot of the introverts I've coached, what I find is that they'll vent a lot to me about the resentment they have towards their employees for interrupting them, because they were just getting into a flow when that knock on the door came. So they have that inner conflict where they want to be available to people, but it really interrupts their ability to think through decisions. So in response to that resentment, to that frustration, to that stress, a lot of times an introvert will then tend to withdraw or take more time, just in reaction to that. And then what happens is that people on the outside of them, their team, start feeling like they're not getting energy from those introverts. They feel like they're not getting that positive support. Maybe they feel like that boss is too serious. This is a really kind of interesting thing, but quite a few of the introverts that I have coached have told me that they have gotten feedback from the people on their teams that the people on their teams thought that they were angry at them. And that is because often an introvert will be thinking while they're walking. So while an extrovert will be walking and paying attention to everything outside of them and saying hello to people and looking into the eyes and everything, an introvert may be on a walk and thinking in their head while they're walking. And if you're thinking in your head while you're walking, you're probably not noticing the things around you, and some of those things around you could be people on your team noticing you. And then you pass right by them without noticing them, and they feel devalued as a result. They feel like, wow, they didn't even say hello to me, or they have this expression on their face, which to you is just your perplexed expression as you're thinking through something, but to them it's an angry expression, because people have no way how to what to make of it, but they're very sensitive and attuned to their boss and their boss's opinion of them. So we make up stories in our head to explain things that we don't know. So when we see our boss not paying a lot of attention to us or having a very serious expression on their face, we will often think that our boss is angry at us. So a lot of the introverted leaders I coach have to actively mitigate that. They have to actively mitigate the fact that their employees will often misinterpret them and think that they're angry at them. So that's something. The other thing is that introverts really do have to think, and if they don't manage their time well enough to get the time that they think by themselves, then they don't respond to emails very quickly, or they don't respond to requests for approvals or other things that their team needs. They may not make decisions as quickly because they need to go through some processing. They need to get some research. They need to think about some things first. So one of the things that's really, really important is that introverts get that time. So I'm going to check again. Are there any other challenges that you may have as an introverted leader that I have not mentioned, or that maybe if you have friends that are introverted leaders? So I'm just going to look again to see if I've got any chats coming through. Takes a minute for my screen to come up. Doesn't look like it. So feel free, as I said, as we go through these screens, to chat anything that comes up for you. And meanwhile, I'm going to go on. So one of the most important things that I have done for my clients is my introverted clients, is teach them how to set boundaries at work. And this seems very counterintuitive, because as an introvert, if you're struggling with this, most of my introverts are getting feedback that they're not available to the team enough, that they're not responsive to the team enough. So what they've been trying to do up to the point where they're talking to me is they've been trying to make themselves more available, yet they've also been very frustrated and just been having a hard time getting their work done, getting behind on things, that sort of thing. And so this idea that setting thicker boundaries if you're an introvert actually makes you more approachable is sort of this big light bulb. And let me tell you why that happens. Because you don't have to be available to your team 24/7 in order to be a good boss. But you do have to be available to your team in a way that is predictable to them. So in other words, if I know that my boss is available at 1 o'clock every day, usually throughout the rest of the afternoon, for me to ask any questions that I need, then what will end up happening is that I will wait until 1 o'clock to access you. But if I don't know when you're coming and when you're going, and you're in the office and you're sort of in your office, but sometimes you're available and sometimes you're not, I'm going to pick up on that tension in you, and I'm not going to know when to approach you. So even if you're there all day, I'm not going to be sure when to approach you and when not to approach you. So I'm going to be a lot more hesitant. So a lot of times what I will have introverts do is plan what times they're going to be in their office where people don't have access to them so that they can focus on getting work done. And that work is usually work that supports their team, such as making decisions, working through their emails and approvals, that sort of thing. So when an introvert actually takes time that they block off, which is not open door time, but closed door time, but it's predictable. Like I know that when my boss comes in, they're going to do a quick walk around to see if there are any crises, but then their door is shut until noon. And they're doing all their quiet work at noon. And so then what I'm going to do as an employee is I'm going to use that time to do my quiet work because I know my boss isn't going to interrupt me at that time. And if I know my boss is going to be available from lunchtime on for me to go visit, that's predictable to me. So now what we've taken a situation is compare a boss who tries to have an open door policy all day, never gets anything done because they get interrupted at random times throughout the day, and then is getting behind on things and is getting more and more stressed out throughout the day. Compare that to a boss who comes in the morning, says hello to everybody, and then goes and hides in their office with the door closed and does not open that door till noon, but does that consistently every single day. And then from 1 o'clock on, their door is open and they're outside. They're talking to employees proactively from, let's say, 1 to 5. And then maybe at 5 o'clock, they go back into they say goodbye to everybody, they go back into their office, and they shut their door for another hour or an hour and a half before they leave. So they have this predictable pattern, and the predictable pattern serves both them and their team. It serves them because it gives them that quiet time so that they can focus and get their work done. It serves their team because it's predictable time. And research has shown that it's not the quantity of time that we need with our bosses or our parents, by the way, but it is predictability, consistent time, knowing when we can access that person. So I did have somebody just text me and say I don't have access to chat. So anyone who's on the phone that happens to know my number, you're welcome to text me a question if you'd like. And I will be sending the recording of this video out to everyone who is signed up. So you'll be able to actually see the PowerPoint slides that I'm showing. But in general, for those of you who are just called in and you're not looking at the screen, the PowerPoint slides are just a picture and the bullets that I'm talking about, all right? So the thing to remember as an introvert is that when you've gotten your own needs met, you feel more relaxed and open to those who need you. When your team is able to predict the times you will and will not be available, they'll happily adapt and accommodate. And that studies show that consistency and predictability provide more safety to your team, to your children, than quantity of time spent. So what I would love to have you think about right now is how boundary setting might work for you. And again, if anyone has any thoughts on this, I would really love to have you chat in. Or any questions, I would love to have you chat in. And I'm going to check again one more time just to see if anyone's chatted anything in. And it looks like, again, we've got a nice introverted group today. And nobody seems to have any specific questions. So I'm going to go on. But I am going to ask you all now to think of a question that you are willing to chat in, just because I think people who are listening to the recording would love to hear me answer some specific questions. All right, so the first thing I always do with introverted leaders that I work with is I help them set boundaries. I help them identify how to divide up their time so that some of their time is spent focusing quietly and really honoring their own needs to have that private time to focus, and then having consistent periods of time when they are unquestionably available to their team. That divide is really important, because that way when you're available, you're available. People can schedule you into meetings and you plan to be available to people. So if you happen to be sitting in your office during the time that you plan to be available to people and nobody comes in your office, you can walk out of your office and check on people. Or you can do something that doesn't require a lot of concentration, so you won't mind being interrupted, but your availability times are open and available, and that way you will be considered approachable by your teams. I have had some people, we say in general, a rule of thumb is you want to get 10 hours of concentration time per week for most leaders. I found that my introverted leaders thrive with a little bit more than that if they could get it. So maybe a goal is 15 hours per week of concentration time. So that could come in the form of 3 hours per day of time when nobody's allowed to interrupt you. It could also come in the form of 2 full days per week where you have 6-hour time blocks. When I work with technical leaders like programmers or other leaders that have like engineers or finance people, accounting people, people that really have work writers that require them to immerse themselves, and then they really don't like getting interrupted, but they need more than 3 hours of quiet to, once they get into flow, they don't like to stop. I'm like that with my program development. So for example, I don't have any phone calls scheduled for Mondays and Thursdays. Those are my 2 days where I do all my thinking work. And then on Tuesdays and Fridays, I do all my coaching work. And I also do it on Wednesdays. But those are the days when I expect to be interrupted with calls. I expect to have meetings. I expect to be available for clients. And I'm not worried, because I know on all day Monday and all day Thursday I can work on my program development, or I can write an article or something like that, which allows me to immerse myself in something, work all day, heads down if I want, and not worry about getting interrupted. So for an introvert, you can divide it however you want, but you should do it in a way that works for you and works for your team. And the most important thing is clarity and consistency. When your team knows that the time that you're not available versus the time that you are available, they will adapt to it, and they will also, many cases, they will actually feel better knowing that, because can't tell you how many people I coach that say, wow, the boss isn't in this week, so we have a nice quieter week. We can actually get our work done. So a lot of times bosses kind of checking in on people, that is disruptive, because people want to be available immediately to their boss, so they will allow themselves to be interrupted by their boss at any moment. So you may not realize it as a boss, but you're actually giving your team also some relief, because they know when you're not available, which means they don't have to worry about being interrupted by you either. All right, so let's talk about some options. The thing to think about is, how do you communicate best? All right, so a lot of times an extrovert will do really well leading a brainstorming meeting. And an introvert can do really well leading a brainstorming meeting as well. So the question is, what ways do you enjoy working with your team? there are so many different ways to communicate with your team, and it's not so much that your team needs you to communicate with them in one particular way or another particular way. Your team needs you to communicate with them, period. So you can use meetings, you can use in-person meetings, you can use Zoom meetings, virtual meetings, you can use emails, text, casual contact, social situations, technology platforms, branding, visual email, visual images. You can put posters around. So there's a lot of ways that you can communicate, but you need to think, what are the things that you need to communicate? People on your team always need to be clear about their goals, where they're going. They need to always have feedback on their performance. If we go backwards, I actually can't go backwards when I'm doing this online. So, yeah, I can't go backwards. I have to do one of these things and then start all over again. It's the funniest thing. So let's go to here. No, that didn't work. I'll just go from the beginning and I'll scroll through really fast. So, what does everyone on a team need from their boss? A clear understanding of goals, regular feedback on performance, support and encouragement, a positive relationship, career development guidance. So what I want you to do is think about these 4 things. How do I want to give people these 4 things? So think about all the different modalities that you have available to you. It doesn't matter which modality you use, and you should use the modalities that feel most comfortable for you and work the best. So for example, some leaders like to have their employees go out afterwards and have a very social interaction, and that works for some leaders, while other leaders may like to take one employee out to lunch every week and kind of alternate that around and have a really deep one-on-one conversation with each person. Those are both very effective ways to build relationships. So you can build relationships however you want. The important thing is that you do it. And as an introvert, often you have to plan it. It doesn't happen naturally. So you have to think, how do I want to build relationships with my employee? How do I want to build trust? How do I want to build the relationship? How do I want to provide feedback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? All right. So what I'm going to share with you here is different ways that people who have actually been my clients who are introverts have communicated with their teams that have been tremendously effective. All right. So I have one person that was a doctor who operated a whole region of a medical organization. So he was a doctor, but he was also a leader, and he was highly introverted, very much in his head. But one thing he did that was amazingly effective is every month he would get all the reports from how they did the last month. And he would review those reports, and then he would send an email to the entire team, all the way down to to the janitors, to the people that were at the front desk answering phones. Everybody would get this email. And on the email, he would outline the results from the last month. He would talk about why they achieved those results, what he believed they did that made those results possible, down to receptionists smiling at people or feedback they'd gotten that people didn't have to wait as long as they thought in the doctor's office. He explained his thinking and his strategy, and he set forth the vision and or the challenges for the following month. He acknowledged employees for specific actions. And what he would do is he would send that email out religiously every month, and people waited for that email with bated breath, and they got so excited about it. Some of them printed it out. They read it. What it did is it brought them close to him, even though he wasn't really out there in their midst shaking hands and talking to them throughout the month. He spent a lot of time in his head. He spent a lot of time thinking. He had meetings, of course, but where they got that personal intention, that personal connection with him, was when they would read his email, because they would actually read his thinking process. And just like you read a great novel, you fall into it and you really feel like you're with that person, and that's kind of what he conveyed. So he was a great writer, and they were able to connect with him through his writing, even though he wasn't out there shaking everybody's hands all month. So that was really effective. Another thing, I had a highly introverted leader, and she was really working hard to show connection to her team, and it was just, she had so much work to do. She was in an accounting department, and she had so much work to do every single day, and she was kind of immersed in that, but she really loved learning, and she knew a lot of people on her team loved learning too. So what she started doing is coming up with learning events that her whole team could do together. And so they did an Excel advanced learning event where they talked about all the tips and tricks that they all used in their various different ways in Excel. And they had, I think, a speaker, or maybe they brought somebody in on Zoom or watched a YouTube video together on an Excel expert that talked about some of the advanced formulas that they used and how they used pivot tables and those kinds of things in Excel. And then they discussed it. And that was really great. Her team loved it. It helped them bond, but it also honored her own value of ongoing learning and personal development. So she took something that she was really interested in, and she shared it with her team, and she started doing those monthlies, and she was able to bring her team together around that, even though it wasn't natural for her to, again, go out and everything. The other thing that she did is she had to systemize going out and talking to people, because it never seemed like it made any difference. So she would go out, and every morning before she went to her desk, into her office, she circled around and said hello to everybody on her team, asked them if they had any questions for her or if they needed anything from her. And she had to consciously do that, because it never seemed very productive to her, because it just wasn't natural to her. But as she did that, she also helped increase the connections on her team. Other things that people that I've worked with have done is planned in advance for their meetings and facilitated discussions. So thinking through how they're going to have a meeting has always allowed them to facilitate a great meeting, instead of going, oh gosh, I have a meeting, and just trying to go in cold turkey and not having planned it in advance. Taking an extra time to plan meetings enables them to run meetings very effectively. I had several of my introverted leaders doing one-on-one coaching and mentoring conversations with their team on a regular basis, because they personally thrive on one-on-one conversations, and team members love one-on-one conversations as well. So the one-on-one conversations actually get pretty deep and meaningful, and they're able to create very meaningful relationships with the people on their teams, and then they might not talk to them at all. Maybe they have a mentoring conversation twice a month. They might not talk to them at all between those two mentoring conversations. And everybody may be off in their own world doing their work, but those mentoring conversations are so high quality that they sort of tide both people over for 2 weeks or even a month. Having more extroverted team members plan social events or fun games and activities at team functions. It's really important to understand that all teams usually have a number of introverted people and a number of extroverted people. So really understanding that extroverted team members need a lot more interaction than introverted team members, and really doing everything they can to help those people get their needs met. And then we already talked about setting boundaries around focus time and systemizing communication. And systemizing communication is the example I gave you, coming up with a system. So for example, it may be every morning at 8 o'clock, I'm going to go around and say hello to every member of my team and see if they need anything from me. And every afternoon after lunch, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to do it twice every month, and it just becomes a habit. And having it become a habit ensures that it gets done. All right, so now I'm going to look again to see if we have any chats. And I'm hoping that there are a few. I know some people can't chat. But, all right, I am not seeing anything. So what I'm going to do, just in case people are on the line that want to chat but can't, I'm going to open it up for I'm going to unmute. Even though we're still recording, I'm going to unmute, and I'm going to just let anybody pipe in with a question, and just know that you're still on recording. You can use your first name if you want and say, hi, this is Candy, or whoever you are, and your first name only, and ask your question if you want. If you don't want to ask a question, you don't have to, but I just want to see if there's any questions anyone would be willing to ask while we're still on the recording. So
Hi, Naheed. This is Elise.
Hey, Elise. How are you?
Good. You know what? You're so on point with me being an introvert, and it's so amazing, all the things you're saying. It's so me. And my challenge and question to you, we may have to talk, but my work is nonstop. I'm a property manager for a team of cleaners, maintenance, owners, guests. So all day long I need to be reachable.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it really interrupts, and I get grumpy because I'm interrupted all the time. So boundary sounds good to me, but I don't really know how I can do that.
Yes.
Boundaries at this time, I cannot receive a call if my cleaner needs me or not. So that was my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think many people are in the same situation as you are, where they have jobs that are kind of already set up in a way where, quote unquote, I always have to be available. But what I would do with anybody in that type of situation is sit down and think about it. You know, do you really have to be available 24/7 to everyone? What is the longest reasonable amount of time that you can take before responding to somebody's text or email? And it may be only 1 hour, right? But whatever that minimal amount of time is, you can usually block off that amount of time at one consistent period time during the day. So it might be lunch hour. But the thing to think about is, if you were in a crisis mode and you were trying to take care of one of your customers and another one was emailing you, you might not feel comfortable interrupting yourself from the first crisis to take care of the second crisis. So the second crisis would have to wait at least as long as you did the first crisis. Or if you had a dentist appointment in the middle of the day and you didn't answer right away. So it turns out that if we think about it, often people are willing to wait for a certain period of time. Now, it may be that people aren't used to waiting, and it makes us more stressed out to make them wait than not. In that case, a lot of times what one might do is have a message, an auto message. And I think in some cases you can set that up on your phones as a text autoresponder. But we all have them on our emails, and we can also do them on our voicemail. And we can actually set up, let's say on our voicemail, a message that says, I just want to let you know that I am in a meeting right now. If you're calling or texting me, I will be out of the meeting at 2 o'clock and I will answer your email then. And so you can begin to set expectations. So it's a matter of really thinking it through, seeing when you could possibly carve out the time and set the expectation. And we start with a little toehold, and then we work towards getting that rhythm. Does that help?
You know what? That's perfect, because actually I put a text message when an owner call. I want to answer them, but I say I'm not available right now for immediate assistance. Call, reach our team, or I will call you back. So those text message, because people now they're texting more than they talk. So everybody's texting me all the time. So that's awesome. That's a good tip.
Right, so setting that expectation, having an automatic text message that says, this is the next time, I will be responding to all text messages between 2 and 3 p.m. today. Currently I'm assisting a customer. I'll be responding to all text messages between 2 and 3 today. If there's something that's urgent that cannot wait until 2, please call blah, blah, blah. And then often you can train your constituents to respect that.
That's awesome.
Thank you for asking that on the recording. I really appreciate it because I think a lot of people probably have that same question. Is there anyone else that has a question or a comment that they would be willing to ask while we still have the recording on?
Another thing also, the big word called micromanaging. I think we need to micromanage. I think it's better than undermanaging. Do you agree?
When you're talking about managing people?
Yeah, because I feel that I'm not present enough for my team because I'm so busy. But I feel, like you said, I feel some of my team members, so I don't see you, I'm like, I don't know what's going on. So you're exactly right of what's happening.
Right, yeah, so when we try to be available all of the time, and we try to respond all the time, exactly what happens is what you just said. People feel like you're actually available, yes, less. But when you carve out time for yourself, then you actually end up being available to your team more. So it's a very interesting paradox, but it works perfectly. Okay, great. Anybody else have a question that you would be willing to ask while we still have the recording on? All right, well, it looks like I have a couple chats. Let me just look at them and see what we have. Okay, so I have some leaders think it takes too much time to check in with everybody, but it saves so much time on the back end to do this on the front end before they make mistakes, are afraid to ask for clarification. Yes, I learned this the hard way. Absolutely. You know, the one person that I had been talking to you about, one of the things that they kept saying is, I don't have any, I just feel like it's a waste of time to go and talk to people because they don't have anything for me. But once they got into that situation, into that habit, people would start having things for them, right? Just appreciating that check-in. Also, it's predictable. So if I'm going to walk around and check in with everybody proactively at the beginning of the day, and then again at the end of the day, or then again maybe after lunch, people begin to predict that, and what ends up happening is they interrupt less, and issues are resolved more proactively because you're coming to them, and so they think of something that they hadn't thought about coming to you for yet, but since you happen to be at their desk, they'll actually, interact with you. So that's a good one. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, it looks like I don't have any more chats, and so what I want to do is just thank everybody for being on the call. And for those of you who are on the call live, I will stay on the line after I stop the recording. But for those of you who are on the recording, I'm going to be turning off the recording in about 30 seconds. But I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, you should feel free to email me directly. And my email is here on the screen, nahid@coachnahid.com. Any questions come up and you're thinking, gosh, I wish I had an answer to this, or I have a unique challenge, just feel free to reach out to me via email, and I would be happy to address it. For some reason, and it could be because I'm a little bit more introverted, I have a lot of introverted leaders that I coach, and I've developed a whole repertoire of tools that they use that tends to make them more effective, and it's just been amazing watching the change. So I've had leaders be given feedback that they were unresponsive, and that changes as soon as they get a system in place. So again, feel free to reach out and ask questions if you are listening to the recording, and for those of you who are on live, just stay on. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn the recording off. So goodbye to everyone that's listening to the video. Let's see, stop. Whoop. Hold on. It takes a couple minutes to find the right buttons here. I want to make sure I'm not quite off yet, but let me just see. Stop recording. Here we go. Bye-bye, everyone who's listening to the recording.